for coming. My name's Stephen. I'm Special Correspondent at the New Statesman, which is one of those titles, and I never realise how silly it is until I say it out loud at an event like this. Our speaker, who I'm sure needs no introduction, Liz Kendall, the MP for Leicester West, former Shadow Minister for Old People, a special advisor under one of my favourite Secretaries of State in the last Labour government, Patricia Hewitt, who, if you've ever worked in a bar, is responsible for you not picking up second-hand lung cancer through second-hand smoking, among other achievements during her time there. The topic we're discussing is the New Left, which I was slightly confused by. I mean, isn't the New Left Corbyn?
John Cruddas asked me to have an edgy title, and I suppose it's quite a sort of cheeky title, really. But it's about the issues, I think, that we on the left need to address if we are going to tackle some of the deep-rooted problems in the country and prepare us for the future. And I hope that in the months and years ahead, as we come up to the next election, we will be a party that champions genuine localism rather than centralisation, that is passionate about transforming the life chances of people in some of the poorest parts of the country, which I think has big implications for our priorities on public services and public spending, that we should be deeply concerned about inequalities in wealth, not just inequalities in income, and in particular that we have a renewed sense of internationalism, particularly with Brexit. And for me, that is the most urgent and important issue, because it's really coming to crunch time for the country and for the Labour Party on that, the biggest issue that we face. So that's my thinking around the new left wing and the issues that we should be focusing on.
For a lot of people, perhaps not in the country, but certainly in the Labour Party, they would respond immediately to say, "Oh, these are things which are contained in the 2017 manifesto." So perhaps we kind of go through them and kind of discuss the extent to which you think that they are present or not present in the Labour manifesto. I'll start with the easy one: centralisation, not devolution.
Well, where I'm coming from on this is thinking about the underlying causes of the vote on Brexit to leave the European Union, and some of the deep-rooted challenges we've got as a country. We are hugely geographically imbalanced. London and the southeast is still responsible for 40% of our economic output. Those are the only two parts of the country that have seen their economies get back to pre-crisis levels. We are very unequal in terms of not just income but wealth. And there are huge parts of the country that, as we saw in the referendum, are very angry about the way the country is working and wanted to take back control. And I think we will not solve both those underlying challenges and problems in the country or deal with the root causes of the Brexit referendum unless we do something radical on giving people greater power and control over their lives. And that isn't just about devolving power to city regions or even to local councils. It is about how you enable people to take power and control over the issues that matter most in their lives. And some of the most transformative services and support that I've seen have come from a very, very localised sense of power and control. And for me, that is an agenda that we need to drive and take forward and resist that other strand in our party and our party's history, which is to centralise power and control, and that is extremely difficult. It's an issue that I know many others in the party have worked on. Lisa Nandy has done an awful lot on this too. But finding ways to help people take power and control for themselves, I think is a very important theme that the left should focus on.
In terms of the kind of real control, and one of the other issues you raised, which is the problem of not just income wealth, but sort of asset wealth, one of the ways that manifests itself in the United Kingdom is our property market.
Yeah.
Now, a proposal that the Labour Party is now putting forward for new builds is that the existing area will have a vote before it can go ahead. Now, the difficulty with that is, on the one hand, there is a very strong argument for giving people that real control over what happens to their built environment. On the other hand, we kind of know that power will more often than not end up blocking new housing development. So, I mean, isn't there a kind of inevitable conflict between getting stuff done and not centralising?
Well, look, let's take a step back here. It is deeply concerning that the poorest half of the population owns only 9% of our nation's wealth. And the top 10% now have around 45% of the country's wealth, by which I mean property, assets, shares, savings, pensions. Why does this matter? It matters to individuals, because if you don't have even a hope in hell of ever getting your own home, you don't have the savings that you need if you have a problem and you have nothing to fall back on. It hurts individuals, but it also harms the way our economy works, because all the incentives are for people to put their money into property, not into necessarily investing in new businesses and growth. And I think it is a huge concern now that, you can no longer earn or save your way into being very wealthy. You have to be born into it, marry it, or inherit it. So it is a problem, I think, for individuals. It's a problem for the way the country works. And as you rightly say, our housing market is completely broken. The number of rough sleepers has doubled, and yet home ownership is at its lowest level for 25 years. If I think about in 1997, when we first elected the last Labour government, it took someone on low or middle income 3 years to save for a deposit. Now it takes 20 years. So these things are all interlinked. So I think we have to take a big step back before we get onto the issue specifically of housing developments. We have to have a much bigger conversation about why we should be concerned, and I would argue probably even more concerned about wealth inequalities than income inequalities, and then what we need to do about it. And I am very interested in the debates that are now taking place about how we can tax wealth effectively, and the ideas of a citizens' wealth fund created out of a new tax on the accumulated gains from wealth. And my view is that should then be invested in universal basic infrastructure, particularly outside of London and the South East, in the regions that we really need to see improve in terms of their growth and jobs and wages. And part of that is obviously around housing, but it is the basic infrastructure, the skills, the transport systems that we really need to see change. And for me, that is then linked with the argument about power and control, because what we've seen from the current government is, sort of championing the Northern Powerhouse without putting the resources in that people really need to see if they're going to change their local area. So rather than getting immediately into a discussion about housing developments, I think it's a much bigger question about how our economy works or doesn't work and what we need to do to change it. And that is something we haven't had enough of a debate about yet on the left.
So you don't necessarily envisage kind of, when you say more control, because I really, this might just be my kind of inner Fabian coming out, but when I hear the word more control, and I automatically think of more voting, so kind of more powers for councils, more powers for...
There are all sorts of ways. I mean, what I want to be very clear about to start is that if you don't have the resources, it's, as I said, it's all very well giving people power, but if they don't have the resources that they need to do it, it's not going to work. But if I think about the examples that I have seen where communities have taken over local community services and support and have actually provided the support that people want, and those community centres then are transformed. I think in my own patch of Manor House Community Centre, which nobody was using, the council wanted to close it down. Local residents decided they wanted to challenge it. They involved the local residents, asking them what sorts of community services and support they wanted. We persuaded the council to let them take over that centre. They put on the services and support that people wanted. Lo and behold, they all used it. It is now a thriving community centre. Or if I think about some of the real innovations in health and social care, where people have been given control over the money that used to be spent on them, telling them what kind of care and support they wanted, and instead people have been given those indicative budgets and have said what kind of support or help they want and need. It has transformed their lives because people know best, particularly if you have a long-term health or care condition, what support will help you live your lives better. So we've got to think way beyond giving people more votes over things. Important though that is, it is about really enabling people to take decisions and take control over their own lives as individuals, within families and in communities. And that is an exciting agenda. It says that it's neither the sort of free market nor purely state-run approach. It is something very different. And I think that takes us back to our roots as a party, which was about ordinary people coming together to help themselves and one another by pooling their assets and resources and taking decisions that would make their lives better. And I think that is a very exciting agenda.
How does nationalisation fit into that mix? If you were if you were writing the next Labour manifesto,
I don't think that's likely. So, look, take an issue like the railways. I think it's absolutely right what we've seen with the East Coast line. When we took that back into the public sector, services improved, it was run more efficiently. There's been a total cock-up with Grayling and what's happened now. I think it's absolutely right that we, as those franchises come up, that the public sector should be given the chance to run it. Although what I would say is, for many parts of the country, I might be more in favour of renationalising the buses than the railways, because I certainly think in my own patch, the buses are a much more important way for people to be able to get to college, to the hospital, to schools, to work. But if you think about the need to transform infrastructure outside of London and the South East. The investment that we need in skills, in education, in the networks that we need. I would just question whether renationalising all of our utilities, the post office and all of that, whether that really would be the priority for public money rather than putting in place the basic infrastructure that we need in other parts of the country. And that's what I think we've got to seriously consider, is what our priorities are. And if you believe, as I do, that the country will never succeed if only London and the South East has got back to pre-crisis levels in terms of economic output, what it would really take to transform the regions, the Midlands, the North East, the coastal areas, that might change the priorities that you have in terms of borrowing and your focus.
Part of the problem of wealth inequality is the condition and the benefits accruing to the wealthy. There is also an issue in this country, I know you agree, with the condition of the poor, and one of the difficulties Labour have had is how it navigates its historical weakness in the minds of swing voters, and it is seen as a soft touch on issues such as welfare. Harriet tried to navigate that in one way, which was not popular in the party. Then, weirdly, in 2017, it turned out that actually keeping the benefits cap was something that the Labour Party was all right with. What would you know?
I mean, I believe in, responsibility from the top to the bottom of society. We should be, I don't know if you saw, slightly answering it from a different perspective, but I don't know if any of you saw the evidence that Carillion gave to the select committees today. It was just appalling. No responsibility whatsoever. So we as a party should be arguing for responsibility at every level of society. But let's take this from a slightly different angle. One of the biggest problems I see in my own constituency in terms of the ability of people from the poorest families and areas to be able to fulfill their potential and live the life that they choose is the fact that the poorest kids start school 20 months behind where they should be in terms of their development. 20 months behind. This is about 3.5, okay? It would take 40 years to close the attainment gap between rich and poor at 5 years old. 50 years to close the attainment gap at GCSE. And currently, there is no hope ever of closing the attainment gap at A-level. Now, we as a party should make that an absolute priority to get to the root causes of why so many people's life chances are determined by where they're born and what their parents do. So for me, I think our national mission should be dealing with those problems, and that we need to talk far more about that, about education and what it would take to make palaces of our schools in the most deprived areas. And that sense of mission around education is hugely important for the future of the country. I don't suppose that actually answers your question, but for me, I think we need to hear far more about those issues, because that is the key to transforming life chances for people in the poorest parts of the country.
So in terms of the, specifically on the point about life chances and early years, and I'm going to be horrendously statist again. What do you feel the kind of policy levers that the left ought to be thinking about pulling? Is it 2 to 11 teacher-led care? Is it having some kind of, compulsory intervention? And isn't just
Well,
leaving...
you know, we should be having universal, high-quality early years services, graduate-led, and my belief is, as you know, I've said many times before that, you know, instead of the Conservatives' inheritance tax cut, which benefits those who already have wealth and assets, that money, we should look at how we tax inheritance and put that money into the very, very earliest years to give everybody an equal start in life. Secondly, on our schools, look, I think we've got ourselves hugely tied up in knots about the structures of our schools when we know what makes the biggest difference is fantastic heads and amazing teachers. And how do we get the very, very best heads and teachers into the schools and areas that need them most? So whilst understandably we have talked a lot about the serious need to deal with the problems around student debt, which must be dealt with, actually I think that our overwhelming priority should be the early years and schools if we are a party that wants to end inequality and make worth, not birth, what shapes your future.
I'm surprised to hear you say that about student debt. Lots of people, myself included, particularly before the 2017 election, would have said that the problem with it is the benefits accrue to the richest graduates, and then actually tuition fees as they stand are kind of fine and dandy. So yeah, would you like to talk a bit more about why you think the debt is an issue?
Well, because I do think the level of debt that people have now, combined with the huge cost of housing, is a serious concern. And I worry not just for young people who are paying off their debt, will have to save for 20 years to even get a deposit. Many won't be able to, and will end up paying rent all their lives, which means by the time you retire, you haven't got your house that you can rely on, and then pensioner poverty will come back to be an issue. So we need a sustainable solution to that, which doesn't mean as well that the poorest bear the biggest burden. But, you know, the issue of what our priority for public spending should be, I would just make a strong argument that the very, very earliest years of life, if you can get that right, if every child started school ready to learn, or if you ended the attainment gap at 5 years old, I think that would be one of the most transformative things we would achieve as a Labour government. So that would be my pitch.
One of the things that some of your kind of behind-the-scenes colleagues from the last Labour government who developed the fee system in its original form say is that they feel that originally it was a way of increasing income taxes by stealth. And they say, well, the 2017 manifesto shows that you can now explicitly say we will put it up on people earning 70k and you can get 42% of the vote. So therefore, we don't need tuition fees anymore, is their argument. So I thought that was a good opportunity to ask you what you thought happened in general in
at
2017.
the election. God, it was a mad election. I mean, not as crazy as the Brexit referendum, which I'm sure we'll come on to. But without doubt, I mean, Jeremy had a great campaign. The simple fact is he loves campaigning and he loves people. And Theresa May doesn't. I mean, she looked frightened. I mean, she looked frightened. Didn't want to talk to people, didn't want to engage with people. And I think whilst we obsess over a lot of policy detail, I've just been talking to Andrew, do a lot about this. You know, a lot of it is about tone and and body language. Their manifesto had absolutely nothing in it, apart from something which really frightened many older people, voters and supporters. We also, I think, many people who had voted Remain at the referendum were angry about what they saw happening. But what I would say is we didn't win the election. We piled up more votes in our big, diverse, liberal, metropolitan university cities. We saw a swing away from us towards the Conservatives in smaller post-industrial towns, villages, rural villages, coastal areas. And we have to think extremely seriously about that if we want to convince those people who swung to the Tories or have voted Conservative to come towards us for the next election. And you know, we have always won when we have managed to build support amongst both those parts of our Labour support. I would also say, you know, there's been a lot of debate about, was there a youth quake? Did lots of young people vote? I'm sure more did, but I saw, I think in my own patch, a bigger increase amongst those in their late 20s, 30s and 40s. But we also do terribly amongst older people. And we are an ageing population. We're going to see double the number of 85-year-olds over the next 24 years. And, you know, we face mirror image problems. The Tories are doing very well amongst older people and not the young. They're doing badly amongst those in our liberal, diverse cities and better amongst those in sort of post-industrial areas. And we have to be able to reach both. People made up their minds very last minute as well. I certainly found that in my own patch. So you won't know this, but Leicester, fabulous, big, diverse city. Leicester West, my patch is predominantly white working class. Leicester as a whole was the only city in the whole of the East Midlands that voted Remain by 2,000 votes, but my seat voted out. So that's the nature of my fabulous constituency.
I wanted to press you on two things. The first, of course, is Brexit. Now,
Yeah.
Your constituency is one of a number of Labour constituencies where the majority of people living there voted to leave. However, the majority of Labour voters nationwide are pro-European. But kind of, I sort of want you to ignore the electoral context and imagine for a moment that, yeah, on 12/25, on whatever the thing it was of June, Gordon Marston's bus is delayed. Jeremy Corbyn does not get on the ballot, does not become Labour leader. You are now Labour leader.
Stretching the imagination a little.
Oh, come on, I mean, Andy would have found some way to immolate. Yvette would have finished third in a field of one. It would definitely have,
Not going to tempt me with that. Okay, what would you have done?
On Brexit?
So what I thought Theresa May should have done immediately after the vote was to say that she had heard the people who wanted our country to change and she would act, but she also understood that 48% of the country had voted for Remain and that she would set out honestly the different options and the pros and cons and trade-offs and challenges we inevitably face. It would not have been easy for anybody to deal with that situation. But having immediately, essentially, got into bed with what the sort of Brextremists, as I call them, who are not prepared to counter any of the very real challenges and problems that we face, means the country remains as divided, if not more divided, than at the referendum. And let me just say that, I mean, I have never known politics to be so divisive as they are at the moment. And that is not good. Somehow we have to find a way forward that we can live with. And my view is that what the Labour Party should be doing is saying that we should remain in the single market and customs union, because that is by the best for jobs, for our economy, for the money we desperately need for our public services. We cannot be an anti-austerity party and want to be out of the single market and customs union. And we should have gone for a Norway-style option, which sees us out of the EU, but still in the single market with a customs union. That's what I think we should have argued for. And we really are at this crunch point. We are at a massive crossroads. I mean, and not just on Brexit. Because the right of the Tory party, the reason they've always wanted Brexit, I believe, is they do see the vision for this country as a deregulated, small state, low tax economy. That's how they think the country should compete. Now, that is coherent. I believe it's wrong, but it is a coherent argument. That's what they want. Why do they want out of Europe? Because they don't want the red tape, workers' rights, environmental standards, consumer protections. They don't want that. They believe that the way we will compete with the rest of the world is by small state, deregulated, slash tax. That's what they want. And that is why I am, and many Labour MPs are so passionate to say that we have to have a strong and clear alternative to the Tories on Brexit, which is the sort of EEA, EFTA, Norway model, which protects our jobs. I mean, did you see, I mean, by the way, I don't know who's an economist here, no offence to any economists, but we all know it is difficult, Andrew, still not over there, excellent, how difficult it is to forecast. Nobody is saying we agree with every point, the different forecasts that are made. But any option is going to see worse for, our jobs and trade, particularly in issues like food and drink, manufacturing, pharmaceuticals, and which areas? The North and the Midlands, the areas that are already at a disadvantage. So we have to have a clear alternative to the Tories. And the crunch point is coming, because the EU is going to set up its guidelines for the next stage in March. By October, this is going to go to the European Parliament and then other parliaments. And we have a historic mission in the Labour Party to fight for jobs and the economy. And we will be badly letting people down if we fail to provide that alternative. Thank you for letting me get that out of my system.
In terms of and I completely agree about the importance of the single market and the customs union, not just to the economy and jobs, but of course to the Irish border and maintaining the Good Friday Agreement. However, as well as the desire for control, one of the big vote drivers in the referendum was a desire for control over immigration. You can't have that in the single market. What should the new left position on migration be? Let me say
on this. Firstly, there are controls over immigration which we could have had even within the existing system for people to register, and if they aren't in work, finding work within 3 months for people to leave. But we've never used that. Secondly, if we take the EEA Norway model, there are stronger controls there, the ability to have an emergency brake over immigration. Thirdly, we should be working with other countries, particularly France. I mean, Macron is changing the way the system works so that people from outside France cannot undercut French workers, the Posted Workers Directive. So there are things that we can do to have greater controls over immigration within the current system that could be there within the EFTA EEA model, and that we could work with other countries, because believe you me, France and Germany, they know that they have issues amongst their own population with immigration. And so I think there is an ability to have greater control over that. But ultimately, we are the Labour Party. You know, we want to protect and improve jobs and the economy. And I think that the Tories, the party that always thought they were championing the interests of the economy and business, I mean, politics has trumped economics now in the whole of this national debate, and we cannot allow that to happen. And because it is our constituencies that suffer the worst. And I am sure that the leadership of our party will listen to the views of party members and the people who vote Labour, who quite clearly want us to remain in the single market and customs union.
In terms of the emergency brake, so I'm going to push you on that. I mean, the problem is that the emergency brake is for when a country is unable to control migration flows. Now, I'm aware that is not the view of many people who vote for the Labour Party and many of the voters Labour needs to win. However, the economic facts are that you would not be able to make a policy case for pulling that emergency brake. So, I mean, is that really a power that you think moves the dial in terms of voter sentiment?
Well, if I think about the conversations I have at home, what people want to know is that people who come here come to work and they pay in before they take out, which the vast majority of EU citizens who come to this country do. But that is a very important sense that people have of fairness. They also want to know that, you know, when new communities arrive, that our public services have enough money to be able to deal with that. And as you know, we had something in place for that. It was never enough money and it didn't go to all the areas that needed it. But we also have to fight some of the myths around immigration. You know, you are more likely to be treated by someone from the EU in the NHS than be behind them in a queue. That is the truth of it. And, you know, we've seen the number of EU nurses leaving the NHS, as the number has trebled. So we have to try and have that balanced debate, but an immigration system based on clearer and stronger rules, I think, is something that people would support.
Sort of one final thing before we open up to questions. I've got it completely wrong. You talked about Macron earlier.
Yeah.
Macron, you know, even John McDonnell says Macron's a man of the left, so I think we can still count him as a win for our side. But across Europe and indeed in the United States, the left is shut out of power, and where it is in power, it is the junior partner or part of a weak and very narrow coalition. What do you think is going on with the left in Europe?
Well, let me just say something about Macron. One of the things he said that I love is, if you're shy, you die. I think that's a great phrase of his. And he is making a strong argument, a pro-European argument, but that Europe must change. That you can't turn your back on the world. You can't disinvent globalization or China or India. What you have to do is change. He wants a Europe that protects. He's not lying to people to say, don't worry, we can just stop all of this trade, stop all of these other countries taking our jobs and doing whatever they want. No, what he's saying is, this is happening, but we will equip you to deal with those changes, and we will reform Europe so it protects the people who need it. He is going out and making an argument, and he is confident of his values, not thinking you can sort of essentially tell people you can stop the world from changing, because we can't. What we have to do on the left is to provide answers to people to enable them to deal with inevitable changes and to put in place the protections and opportunities people need to deal with those changes. And that, I think, is the approach that we should take to the, you know, we are sort of both ends of the spectrum, the sort of protectionist, nationalistic right, and sometimes protectionist anti-West left, are things we have to find a different way through. Because, as I said, you can't disinvent China or India or technology or globalization. It will happen. The question is, how do we deal with it? And how do we equip the majority of people in the country to deal with those changes? And for me, you know, the choice is not between, you know, an unfettered, untrammeled free market or a state-run economy. That's not the choice. The choice is, how do we rewire our market economy so it delivers prosperity for most people? How do you transform opportunity in this country? How do you push power out of Whitehall and London? And it's an exciting agenda. I mean, it's a mad time in politics at the moment. It really is. I've never known a period like it. But things can change if we shape the world around us and have the confidence in our values. And I see Macron doing that, Trudeau doing it, and that's what I think we on the left should be doing in this country too.
Thank you. I'm sure you have lots of questions about that.
Or anything.
Or indeed anything else in you know, that might come to mind. The gentleman over there in the jumper. Yeah,
so I'm interested in this question about the communities exercising great control over their own lives, over decision making. So I think this is kind of like sentiment that a lot of the left get behind at like a rhetorical level. But then when we kind of like talk about what that means more concretely, many on the left kind of actually oppose the sort of tangible suggestions that are put forward. So if like communities having greater control over their own lives means sort of like being allowed to like local councils being allowed to raise like more taxation and then keep that money for themselves, that could have like distributive effects that the left wouldn't like, and it would create inequality in terms of like regional and local inequalities. And if, you know, I mean, an example of like a policy measure that New Labour were quite keen on, like the NHS Foundation Trust within an NHS context, would be a good example of trying to like, give communities greater control, but kind of goes against the kind of like national centralising ideas like behind the NHS. So there's this kind of like conflict.
And we've always had you know, if you look at the history of our party, you know, as I said, we were formed from trade unions, cooperative movements, people coming together to help themselves and one another, pooling their resources, sharing their risks. And then when we got into government, post the Second World War, helped create the welfare state to make sure those benefits were shared more widely. We've always had this tension between the two. But I'm not enabling people to take power and control over their lives isn't just about giving more power to local councils. I mean, a lot of people I see in my surgeries and constituency, you know, there is, you know, to them the council seems very distant, taking decisions over things that not understanding their lives. Equally true, the NHS, which we love and is one of our most precious institutions, can often not really understand what people and families themselves want and need. So I would just argue that it has to, don't just think of it within that prism of giving more power to city, regions or councils. I'm talking about something much more grassroots, community, neighbourhood, family-based, because local councils can seem very, very distant to people just as much as central government.
But I'm going to push on this kind of specific issue that I think is a very crucial one, which is, you know, more powerful, you know, me and my family. This is a slightly weird way to talk about just me and my partner. But, you know, we are above average income. We earn, I think, probably more than anyone else in our block of flats, which is still mostly social housing. Mm-hmm. How does us taking more control what do we do when we go, actually, we've decided we'll keep our money?
Well, look, there are always risks when you know, or perceived risks when people have greater freedom and control and differences. But I think, you know, there are fundamentals that we should guarantee for people's living standards. That's why we have a minimum wage. We need to, you know, for people who are out of work, for those with disabilities, access to our health services and education. But there are many things where differences are good in terms of services and support that people have, because people's needs are different. So that's the approach. I think there are basics that we all need and that should be guaranteed. But there are many other things that can be completely different. And we shouldn't be frightened of that, because people's needs are different.
With the beard, please.
Hello.
So, in the Brexit referendum, a fairly sizable majority of working class people voted to leave, but more than 90% of Labour MPs supported Remain. So in what sense did Labour represent the working class?
Well, actually, the majority of, the majority of Labour voters did vote Remain. But I have no doubt that, I hate to call it even our traditional working class areas. I don't think you can, our heartlands, I don't even like to call it that anymore, because I don't think you can ever take particular areas for granted. And I think that this is part of a real anger at the way the economy and country has been run, which, and actually, you know, this was the most important thing, I see Stewart over there, that Ed absolutely got right, which was that the economy wasn't delivering rising wages for people even before the financial crisis. And one of the things that I certainly think of the party I come from was far too slow to understand that and recognise how the economy wasn't working. But our mission has got to be to deliver for those areas. And the truth is that being out of the single market and customs union is going to cause even greater problems for those areas. So you don't just throw up your hands and say, well, you all wanted to leave the single market and customs union. That wasn't on the ballot paper. That was not on the ballot paper. And we will look back in decades to come if we don't fight for that. And people will ask, where were you? And what did you do? And I'm going to hopefully say, at least I tried.
On the specific, kind of the sort of more kind of, tangible questions, was it a sign that the Labour Party had lost touch, that so much of the parliamentary party was in one place, while a third, and obviously you can critique the MRS social grade categories a bit, but, you know.
Well, look, it wasn't a shock for all of us, this vote. It wasn't. I think it felt more of a shock. Some people, you know, as I said, I was our EU champion for the East Midlands. And nobody I spoke to outside of London, in many of those places, wanted to vote for Remain. It was not a shock to me, and it came from many different things, you know, that vote. It wasn't just about what happened in the campaign, although I think that played a big part. I don't think we ever really had, if you look back at it, you know, a sort of overwhelming national reason for being in the EU. We weren't like Germany and France, who wanted to be in the EU to stop slaughtering each other. We weren't like the Eastern European countries who wanted to be in the EU to escape the yoke of communism. We were in it for practical, reasonable purposes. So that's one set of reasons. Another set of reasons was about much longer, deeper underlying problems with the economy that meant huge, it wasn't working for huge parts of the country. Thirdly, the Leave lot ran we know, many of us believe there are a lot of lies in the campaign, but they ran a very clear campaign. I mean, we didn't speak to people's values and passions. It all ended up being a sort of, a question of facts and figures when really you have to pull at people's heartstrings. So there were all sorts of reasons why the vote happened. But where we are now, I just think it would be wrong for us as a Labour Party to acquiesce to being out of the single market and customs union. I think that would be a betrayal.
Yes.
As you've just said, the Leave campaign.
Oops.
The Leave campaign appeals to people's emotions more than the economics. So, isn't it going to be a tough sell to people given the economic forecasts before the vote, and they rejected them? And now the main argument that we're putting forward is we're going to suffer economically. So isn't it going to be quite hard to get those people back with essentially the same argument?
But I think I understand that people are highly sceptical of forecasts, but people do see what's happening with staff leaving the NHS. They do see prices going up because of the pound, and they will see local, their employers starting to make changes and losing business if we're out of the customs union and single market. So
But that'll have to happen, won't it, before they see the effects?
well, I think people are seeing some of the effects, certainly in the NHS and in terms of the cost of the weekly shop already. I think the sort of huge, everything will crash immediately if we vote out I never made that argument myself. And I think that is something that has caused a lot of problems now. So I think that the practical concerns that people would have for their jobs, it's got to be much more framed in that way. And it has to be a Labour argument. The Labour leadership has to go out and make that argument in Labour areas much, much more strongly. And I think that had been, we haven't seen anywhere near enough of that.
Stewart.
Thanks for coming in.
Thanks for inviting me.
Make a devil's advocate for
I wouldn't expect anything less, Jim.
It's actually more of an early academic point, not a political point. But the two heroes, in inverted commas, you mentioned at the end, who are leading with their values, Macron and Trudeau, neither of whom would call themselves on the left. They're probably better spot. Trudeau is a liberal, and Macron is kind of an anti-traditional French socialist, centrist liberal. And, if anything, what's Macron done? He's slashed taxes on the wealthy, and he's liberalising labour markets, much to the ire of the socialist base. Trudeau, you can argue, is doing various things, and he's definitely a hero when it comes to internationalism and investing in international institutions, but I wouldn't say his domestic agenda is characterised by being quite lefty. And this isn't a cheap shot. The question is this: you spoke very persuasively of a kind of vision of where we should go as a party and where the country should be. But isn't it much more in a liberal tradition than a left tradition that you're talking about? You're talking about not being in the grip of a big state obsession. You're talking about restoring control. You're talking about remaining in free trade arrangements that benefit the aggregate. Aren't they? It's not at all a slight, I promise you. But isn't that a liberal radical tradition rather than a left radical tradition?
I don't think it's news to anybody in the room that I am, more from the progressive Social Democrat wing of the party. But I think that a genuine devolution of power and control and a rewiring of the economy, particularly around wealth and responsible capitalism. We haven't even discussed discuss that, about inclusive growth. I think I see that very much as part of the left tradition, but it's one we often forget because we do focus so much on the power of the state alone. Do not get me wrong. The power of the state to transform people's lives is essential, but we have too often forgotten that part of our tradition and party that is not just about the state alone. And I would like us to re-find it.
So I'm very aware that all of the questions have been
Come on, Leify.
Yes.
Excellent.
Doesn't devolution just sometimes make the situation worse? So the Blair government gave Scotland and Wales more autonomy and to try and keep them happy and content in the union, but now it's just exasperated the problems and they're advocating, Scotland's advocating for more independence. So does it not necessarily make it, I don't know, more less coherent with the country as a whole?
Well, we didn't give create the Scottish Parliament and the Welsh Assembly to keep the Scots and the Welsh happy. We did it because we believe that decisions are best taken, in my view, many ways, as close to and by people as possible. And not all differences are bad. I think that's the point, that you can do things in different ways. Some differences are bad, but not all of them are. And actually, I would like to see within Scotland, the Scottish Parliament and the SNP have been terribly centralising and controlling. They want all these powers, even more powers. They don't use the ones they've got, and they don't push those out to local communities either. So I have much more faith in people and the ability of people to take decisions over their own lives than many others. One of the first books I ever wrote was on something called citizens' juries. I don't know if you've heard of them. It's a way of getting a cross-section of ordinary people to come together, to hear the evidence, to cross-examine people and to take decisions over local services or support. And it was totally poo-pooed at the time, but often by a lot of people some people within New Labour. Oh no, you don't want to be doing that. We can take the decisions. We know best. But actually that isn't true. And if I think about it, on health and care, that's the area I have most expertise in. You know, if you're a patient who lives with a long-term condition, or you're the daughter or son of someone with dementia, you cannot provide good care for someone with dementia unless you involve the family, because that person has lost their memory. You can't provide that service or support without genuinely, in a detailed way, involving and supporting those people to take decisions. And yes, you need a strong state to be able to provide the resources and the support, but they can't do it all on their own. And that is something we've really got to think about. You know, we should be as passionate about changing unresponsive public services as we are about challenging failing markets, because both take power and control away from people.
But do you not think that by saying that we should give them, I just feel like what you said has been a bit contradictory in that you, for example, have given the example of using citizen juries to get people's opinions rather than kind of overruling them and say, we know best, but isn't that what the Brexit position that you're advocating would do? You would say, we got your opinion, thank you very much, but actually we think that we still know best, so we're going to keep us in the single market.
Was staying in the single market and customs union on the ballot paper? It wasn't. It was not on the ballot paper. And we can, you know, at the least, we can, it's not though. It really isn't. That was not on the ballot paper. And actually, there is a way through at the very least, which is the Norway EFTA, out of the EU, but still in the single market with a customs union. That is an option for us. And that's where I think we should go.
I just think like you risk alienating the people that we're trying to attract.
I mean, I have no doubt that that is a serious concern, but that is why I'm not saying, overturn the result. And why I voted to trigger Article 50. But I'm saying there is a way through that delivers on the result, but just doesn't screw the country and the economy. And I would like the Labour Party to advocate that.
But isn't the problem that it's quite hard, I think, to analyse both what the two campaigns said and all of the things every poll tells us about why people voted in a way which suggests that people, what they wanted to leave was the decision-making structures of the Commission and the Parliament. They wanted...
Well, referendums are, this is the difficulty with referendums, isn't it? It asks a simple question, which is very, very complicated, and people voted for different reasons. Some people wanted because they wanted less immigration. Some people said they wanted the sovereignty of Parliament, which is now being tried to be denied by the government. Some people were angry. I remember this guy in Corby. You know how this is a thing that politicians do, which I know is annoying for people sometimes, but I can't forget him. He's just said, excuse my language, how can it be any more shit than this, is what he said. We might as well try something. I mean, that is... So there were... Now, I've no doubt that some people have analysed all the ins and outs of the single market, the customs union, the ECJ. But that bloke in Corby was angry about what was happening, and he wanted to try something different. And, that's why he voted. And actually, I thought initially, Theresa May, on the steps of Downing Street when she became Prime Minister, when she said about the country not working for ordinary people, I thought she got that, but she doesn't at all. Our job is to get that and make the fundamental changes in the way the economy works to sort it out.
But doesn't that come back to the contradiction point there, which is I agree that because of the nature of referendums, particularly when the government doesn't support the change proposition, there were definitely more people who voted to leave who wanted to stay in the single market than were the decisive margin, right? So you can make a strong case that there is a majority in the country for staying in, but at that point, doesn't it kind of drive a coach and horses through the idea of giving more power to individuals? Because ultimately, the representative function is still a bit where, someone in Whitehall or Westminster or the town council says, yes, but we know best and we are going to interpret your wishes in this way.
Oh my God, as I said, people voted leave for many, many, many different reasons. The single market and the customs union weren't on the ballot paper. I think if we're out of that, it will cause huge problems for areas that are already struggling. I know I'm just repeating myself, but I think as a Labour Party, we have to fight that hard Brexit and come up with something which delivers on the result without screwing the country. And I think there is an option. I just hope that we argue for it.
I'd like to go off the tangent and ask about the party machinery. And to what extent do you think Corbyn and those immediately around him and his strong supporters have got control over the party machinery, that it would be extremely difficult for the Democratic wing to reassert itself? And I suppose by extension, there's a question here about momentum.
Well, I mean, Jeremy and his supporters are very strong throughout the party, but I think the issue is whether we remain a broad church. I mean, actually, both political parties, I think, are sort of stretched to their limits, and the one that will win at the next election is someone who can, the party that can keep together the broad church, actually. And we have always been made up of different parts of the party. Sometimes you're up, sometimes you're down. But the key is to remain that broad church, and that we will see what happens on that.
Do you think it would be better for politics if we had different electoral systems? So instead of having kind of a social democratic party, a radical liberal party, a socialist party, a populist left party, all having to kind of continually fight over the wheels of the car, they fought each other among the electorate and then...
Well, no, I mean, I would like us to remain as we always have done. We've always benefited from all of those different wings of the party, and I'm very proud of the part my bit of the party has played in transforming the country. And I hope that we remain like that. That's all I can say. Sorry, sir.
Interlinked. My name is Robert Taylor. I think the last Labour leader was John Smith, to start with, because I'd like to know two questions. One is, what achievements of the Labour government between 1997 and their defeat, and Gordon Brown's defeat, would you highlight in the light of two facts today? Andrew Adonis, who seems to be repenting and criticising Blair for being sucking up to the rich, amazing. Andrew I know well, he's changing a lot. And the fact that Conservatives believe it is unbelievable, are 4 percentage points ahead in the poll today, which I saw. That seems to me to be very dangerous for the Labour Party. Yeah. And I do think we need to assess, we haven't mentioned Labour at all. I want to know the achievements of the Blair government and why they evaporated so quickly. And you were, in a sense, in the last leadership election, you were the figure, rightly or wrongly, seen as the Blairite candidate.
I was a Kendallite. No, I'm joking. I'm a Kendallite. I think it's bizarre how we name people after all of that. No, I'm sure.
Unfortunately, the question about a liberal approach or a Labour approach has some validity. Because as we speak, the last fact I'll make is that Theresa May is facing the Japanese car companies, Nissan and others, a bit in Downing Street this minute, because they're thinking of pulling out their investments. Now, your idea of taking control is all very well. It reminds me when I was at the Oxford Labour Club in the 1960s, workers' control it was called. Are you suggesting that the big companies should be taken over by the workers and their families? Or how are we going to have investment in this country without the use of a big state to help?
Well, I'm certainly not... Well, there's many things to cover there. Where do I start? Probably the biggest achievement of the Labour government was when we got in 1997, people waited over 18 months for an operation, and when we left it was 18 weeks, and we obliterated the private insurance sector because nobody had to pay to go off and get quicker treatment privately. They could get it on the NHS. Well, you asked me for what the achievements are. Well, it rebuilt many of our hospitals.
I don't want to have a sort of shouting match about the legacy of New Labour because there's limited time for more
paternity leave
questions.
for the first time, the first ever childcare strategy, my Sure Start centres, my rebuilt schools, devolution, which I think was a huge achievement. There are many. But I am also very clear that we were, especially towards the end of our time in government, too slow to understand about the changes in the economy and what they meant for people, particularly in the Midlands and the North. That the global economy was not delivering rising wages for the majority of people. So, you know, that's... I mean, I could go into a huge thing about the achievements of the former Labour government, of which I am very proud. And it's insofar as how do we enable people within businesses to take more control, I am a strong supporter of employee-owned businesses. I, during the Labour leadership, said that we should have workers on the boards of companies. I think we can one of the things that is of huge concern, particularly if you look at something like Carillion, is the utter failure of the corporate governance of those companies, and the shareholders, especially passive investors like BlackRock, who ended up not doing anything to put the checks and balances on what the company was doing, and then made a fortune out of shorting the shares, and one of the biggest profits of the downfall of that company. So there are many ways, I think, that within the economy, and if you look at the way the workforce is changing, you know, we now have more people who are self-employed than on the minimum wage, and by the end of this parliament there'll be more people who are self-employed than work in the public sector. Now, for many of those people, they have chosen to be self-employed. Many of them haven't. It's a way of, you know, dodging companies trying to dodge their responsibilities. But we need reformed and renewed trade unions to be supporting. I mean, the trade union that ends up being the trade union of the self-employed, I think will make a huge difference. We have to absolutely transform the way our trade unions work, particularly in the private sector where the membership has gone down and down. So there are many different ways that you can try and give people within the workplace greater rights and greater control. And that's another agenda we haven't had time to discuss that this evening.
There's a specific question I want to press you on more from those, which is that although the last Labour government had a number of great achievements, it doesn't feel there's an immediately obvious enduring institution like Wilson's Open University or Attlee's NHS. I mean, one, do you think that there is an enduring institution of the last Labour government? And if not, why do you think that was?
Well, I do think we saved the NHS. You know, it was, and I think that if you look at an issue like childcare, people forget before 97, nobody was talking about childcare, family-friendly employment, parental leave and pay. That is something now that all of the main political parties fall over themselves to talk about and to say that they champion. I don't always think it's an institution which encapsulates what a government does. Ban on smoking in public places, as you said earlier, civil partnerships. There are many things that we achieved. They might not have been entirely new institutions, or if they have, like Sure Start, they're under threat now. I think that's a terrible state of affairs.
Well, actually, the gentleman from the floor made the excellent point that the national minimum wage, of course, is a fair... yes,
A lot of the things you mentioned, childcare, education, health, social care, rely on the public sector professionals. Do you have any specific ideas about how we can ensure that we sort of continue to be able to recruit people into the public sector, particularly in these kind of frontline care roles, and retain them?
Well, the thing that I am most obsessed about, actually, is care for the elderly. I mean, it is a disgrace that many care workers don't even get the minimum wage, let alone the living wage, because they're not paid for travel times between going to see people. And I think this is partly a gender issue, that caring has never been valued as highly as it should be. It's predominantly female workforce. And we need a new settlement on funding social care, health and social care together. I'm trying to support work on a cross-party basis to get a decent funding settlement for health and social care. I think this issue of our ageing population, that 1 in 4 babies born today is going to live to 100. I mean, everybody in this room, if you haven't already, you may end up caring for your parents, as well as bringing up your own kids. And we have not woken up to this. It's as an amazing thing that our parents are living for longer. But those services have to be properly funded. And either it's all left to the individual, or we share our resources and we pool our risks. And that's the settlement we need. We can't look at the NHS and social care separately anymore. And unless we get that funding, we won't be able to get the staff and support the training and the decent pay they need. You're paying people to help look after your mum and dad. And that's something we will all have to find a way to pay for.
In terms of the kind of specific question of attracting public sector professionals, in a city like Leicester or a city like Oxford or a city like London, there are jobs crucially for people's partners, there are lots of pull factors that make it, and obviously the housing market then pushes those people away for other reasons. But there is then a difficulty about how you attract high quality head teachers to very small towns where there is not an immediately obvious job for their part. Do you think that, perhaps upending national pay scales is one way you get the...
No, I mean, I see this as linked to the agenda around devolution and regeneration of areas. There's a lot of power, as we know, going to Manchester and the Manchester mayor, but as many have argued, what about the towns and smaller towns around? They are all linked. Unless you get the jobs and the infrastructure spread not just in the big cities but out, then you are going to find it hard to attract the teachers, the public sector workers and their partners there as well. So I think if we really got a good proposal for pushing power and the resources out to the regions, an agenda around housing, jobs, infrastructure, skills, you can't sort the two. You can't sort the problem without doing the two together. And that's why I think we have to think really hard about our spending priorities and whether they are in the right places on the right issues, because they're all interlinked.
The gentleman over there.
If you're looking for another achievement of the lab...
I could have done a massive list, but I thought that might annoy people.
Could I very parochially suggest that one of them was the, in my view, saving of the university system, which expanded very significantly, which brought in many more students from low-income households, many more women, and which was funded in what I regard as a progressive system, which was a limited amount of debt paid back on a progressive basis, a small graduate tax, if you like. And I think that was a very substantial achievement which has not been trumpeted enough. And if I might, could I segue into a response to your proposal for a Labour programme which puts much more emphasis on the education of primary school children in order to reduce the gap? I'm completely persuaded by that. I think that should be at the core of any party on the left that wishes to reduce structural inequality. I'm sure that's right. But I wonder if you would agree that this to be achieved, it's such a stubborn problem, that to be achieved it requires huge investment of resource, an enormous investment of resource over a sustained amount of time. And if that is the case, we think that that is consistent with saying now also we are going to either abolish or significantly reduce tuition fees. Because I think there has to be a limit to the amount of resource that can be invested in any sector of any welfare sector of the economy, and it's just unrealistic. So you're going to do both.
Well, then I obviously wasn't clear. I was trying to argue that our priority should be which should be on the early years in schools, that we need reform of the way the student finance system is working, but I was questioning whether our priority should be abolishing student fees and abolishing all debt if what we really want to do is transform life chances of children in the poorest areas. People like the Sutton Trust have come forward with proposals that would reduce the fees, that would focus on putting the maintenance grants back in place, that would change the way it's structured so that the poorest are helped the most, but that actually that's the way we deal with the problem rather than saying the whole thing's abolished and all the debt is paid off. Because if you really want to transform people's lives, you would put, your priority would be those early years in schools.
Sorry, just so people can go back and read it, what's the name of this Sutton Trust report?
They've just done a review into student financing, and it does look at bringing back maintenance grants, not totally abolishing fees, but reducing them and reshaping them in a way that means that actually those, that it is sustainable over the long term.
And we've got time for one last question. So the young man in the plaid.
Or do you want to take a bunch, and then I could be really, really short?
So, yes, you.
He's had his hand up for ages.
You hand up for ages, and then you right at the back as well.
I was sort of interested to see you mention the citizens' juries, and I'd suggest, if you haven't already, you look at the Electoral Reform Society's citizens' assemblies, and in Scotland, the Act as If You Own the Place campaign. I think you're right that there should be a lot of devolution of those sort of decisions. But obviously there's still going to be a big role for central government. So how do you think that we can make central government and Parliament more responsive? What do you think about things like proportional representation, reform of the House of Lords, and future use of referendum?
Yeah.
I would ask you what you think the fiscal space, the fiscal capacity that the British government has to fund, for example, your vision of a decentralised Britain. So we know Britain has its own currency, so Britain can produce as many pounds as it wishes. There's no constraint on the supply of pounds. It's not like coal. So why can't we call for a fully funded decentralised NHS, or a fully funded decentralised educational system, or a fully funded decentralised public guarantee of employment? You say you're the party of employment, or perhaps more important than anything, a fully funded, decentralised greening of Britain. I mean, is there anything more important
Greening
than
of
that?
Britain, indeed.
I mean, that's, some people say it's like an existential threat, so we should be committing ourselves to it in the way that Britain committed itself to in World War II. In other words, it spent everything it had to deal with the problem. So what's stopping us from doing all these things? You say you want to be funded anyway.
Yeah, okay.
And that last one right there.
Yeah, it seems like your argument on the EU is kind of to be like the most in the EU without actually being in the EU. And
I'd rather we were in it.
No, yeah, exactly. And whilst that would be better than a hard Brexit, do you not think in that situation we're basically just everything's the same as before, except we don't have the power or control to change anything? And at that point, if that's the situation, would there be no point in making the case that we could have the same, but just with the power to change things, like the power for people to...
Okay, I'll take those in. So, I'm not at all against the public having a final say on the deal, whether that is in Parliament or at another general election. And we will be faced with a choice. If we're out, these are the options. Is it what you wanted to vote for? I'm not against that. So, you rightly say there are trade-offs here. And what I very much hope, I don't know if Stewart's gone. I'm sure the House of Lords will be working on those amendments to the bill. In terms of, I've always been in favour of changes to our voting system. I campaign for I seem to be involved in a lot of campaigns that don't work out so well. The AV referendum. I really support the strong constituency link. I feel I know what my job is. Who am I there for? But I do think having some level of PR for additional top-ups, possibly by region, would be a good thing. Strongly in favour of reform of the House of Lords. I'd like it all to be elected. I cannot see that there is any appetite for that at the moment, but I've always been that wing, strongly in favour of that. And on your question of what's stopping us, I tell you what, generally speaking, is people don't like giving power away when they get it, and they think that they know best.
But how does that affect how much we spend? I'm asking, what capacity does the British government have the Tories have one version, they talk about running out of money. Do you say that Britain might become insolvent? Do you say that there's
no
money in
I mean,
Treasury?
we have much more scope than we think, and certainly I think there are ways, there are
constraints.
Well, I mean, that is, I think, could be a whole other hour and a half. What I believe is we do need, for example, as I said, to look at new ways of taxing wealth. I think that that is important in terms of investing in our public services. We would be doing far better as a country in terms of growth if we didn't have such disparities between London and the South East and elsewhere. And I do believe that when interest rates currently remain so low, that borrowing, I would certainly like to see our local councils lift the borrowing cap so we can build more housing. Those are not constraints that we face. But I do think what will be a constraint is if the economy is harmed by a hard Brexit, and that is currently the thing, as you can tell, that is most obsessing me. And I do think that we are at risk of still a no-deal Brexit. Jacob Rees-Mogg said the other day we should just stop negotiating with the EU on the 29th of March 2019, and that would be a disaster. All roads lead back to Brexit at the minute for me.
On that apocalyptic note, thank you so much for
Thanks.
coming. Thank you all of you for coming to